Alright, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back. It's me, Adi, again, and I hope you guys are doing amazing as always. I'm back with yet another review today, this time not on a Metal Gear Solid game. We're taking a bit of a hiatus from the marathon that we've been doing over on my Twitch streams. Today I'm going to be talking about a game that I began back in early October, late September, a game that I hold very near and dear, but that I took, speaking of hiatuses, a hiatus from for a couple of months to play a bunch of other games. But we recently revisited it and finished it up just this last week, and I'm really glad that we did. I'm of course talking about Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles, aka the remaster to Final Fantasy Tactics. This is my second favorite Final Fantasy game, right after FF7, which isn't just my favorite Final Fantasy, but favorite game of all time. And to be honest with you, I frequently go back and forth between Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy IX being my second favorite Final Fantasy game. But having played the Ivalice Chronicles now, which came out late September, and having beaten it to completion, I think I can pretty confidently say at this point that Final Fantasy Tactics is my second favorite game after Final Fantasy VII in the franchise. Simply put, this is a phenomenal remaster to a phenomenal game. Final Fantasy Tactics at its core provides some of the best tactical RPG gameplay you will ever find in any video game. I'm someone admittedly who has almost no love for this genre. Don't get me wrong, I respect it, it's really cool, but I've never been able to get immersed and really enjoy and sink my teeth into tactical RPG games or TRPGs. Just in general, strategy games overall. I haven't ever been able to really enjoy them, but every now and then there comes along a game as part of a genre that I normally don't play that really has me loving it. And Final Fantasy Tactics is absolutely that game for that vein of games. If I had to guess why, it's because of that Final Fantasy coat of paint, because of the job system of the Final Fantasy series that I have a lot of love for. I love a solid job system in a Final Fantasy game, and Tactics serves as the epitome of great job system design for the series. But on top of that, there is so much more sprinkled in that makes it such a memorable, immersive experience. It's got really tight, mature writing in this space where there's a ton of politicking going on in a Middle Ages inspired setting. Because yeah, this Final Fantasy focuses on the medieval fantasy aesthetic of the franchise, but it does so in, like I said, the most mature way I've ever seen the series handle the aesthetic. It really comes across as the Game of Thrones of Final Fantasy, if you will. I think the most impressive aspect of Final Fantasy Tactics' story and writing is, despite the fact that you have these pixel characters within these diorama stages, you're still able to take everything so seriously. And I think the most impressive feat accomplished by the remaster here, the Ivalice Chronicles, is the voice acting. If there is one reason you should go out and play this remaster, it is the voice acting in and of itself. Just for that alone, you should absolutely consider playing this game. I grew up playing Final Fantasy Tactics a ton, specifically the War of the Lions port for PSP and iOS, which added a bit of content here and there to the original 1997 PS1 release. And for a majority of the experience, I would have to read the dialogue and imagine what the characters sounded like in my head, just like any other old school RPG. And because Final Fantasy Tactics has such a complex story, such a complex backdrop with a lot of scheming, politicking, conspiring, it's that kind of a game, you can miss out on a lot of key details while reading, certain things go over your head. But now with voice acting added via the Ivalice Chronicles, you pick up on so much more of the story. And there's so much more nuance you can pick up on as well with the voices of the characters that really allow you to get into their emotional headspace and understand what they're going through in particular scenes. For example, there's this one really harrowing scene close to the beginning of the game where there's a specific character who gives someone the order to shoot someone who you're trying to save, and you can really tell in their voice that they didn't want to give that order. And without voice acting and having to read the dialogue, you kind of have to infer that without being given it. So the voice acting does a lot of heavy lifting here for this remaster. It adds a ton to the experience. And every single one of the voice actors for all of these iconic characters from Tactics did more than a phenomenal job. They brought their 200% to this experience here. And the icing on the cake for me was the fact that the legend Ben Starr is in this game as well. He voices one of the villains of the game, Dysadarg. And to me, it's really cool that he voices a villain here because we're typically used to seeing him as either the hero or at the very least a morally gray character. But Ben Starr as Dysadarg in Final Fantasy Tactics works extremely well, even better than I thought, because I'll admit, initially, I wasn't sure if he was the right man for the job, and hearing some of the voices for some of the main characters of the experience in the initial reveal trailer for Final Fantasy Tactics, which, by the way, had me incredibly hyped, and I'll play a little clip of my reaction to Final Fantasy Tactics' reveal in a second. Having heard those voices in the reveal trailer, I wasn't immediately sold on the voice actors for the characters, but then I played the game and any and all doubts that I had were immediately erased. They ended up sounding even better than what I always imagined them to sound like growing up playing the War of the Lions version. And I'll admit, the War of the Lions version, it did have these beautiful cinematics here and there throughout the game that gave you the voices for some of the characters, like, you know, the main character Ramza, Delita, and what have you. And so in my head going into this experience, those were my points of reference for the characters. That's what I thought they would sound like. But to be honest with you, and I mean, of what little we heard of Delita and Ramza in the War of the Lions version, those voice actors did a great job with their respective characters. But Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles, the voice cast for them made me come to the conclusion that this is the best the characters have ever sounded. So yeah, the voice acting is the absolute highlight of this remaster here. And before I go any further, let me play you my reaction to the Ivalice Chronicles' reveal trailer. This is something that I wanted for a very long time. It's something I was really excited for a long time. Just a polished up port of Final Fantasy Tactics to all the systems. And that's exactly what we've gotten here. Again, with the voice acting as well, which is the greatest icing on the cake. Here you go. This is my reaction to the reveal. This is how much I love Final Fantasy Tactics. Nothing that catches my eye just yet. Digimon. Wait. I don't know what to say. I'm speechless. This is one of the best moments of my life, dude. This is one of the best moments of my life. The Final Fantasy Tactics remaster is real? Oh my god. Oh my god, it's real. Oh my god. Oh my god. Why are my headphones? Oh my god. Battle at the bridge. Oh my god. Holy crap, the map. You can see what... You can see what you need for the jobs now. Or land... Voice acting. Dude, Ramza sounds sick. Let's fucking go. Let's go. I'm so happy right now, you guys. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this game. I played it a ton growing up. And besides the voice acting, the stuff that you anticipate in a remaster is all here. It's all great. This game gives you some wonderful quality of life additions that makes this the best version of the game to play from a gameplay standpoint. One big addition that comes to mind is being able to see a job tree now. In the original Final Fantasy Tactics and War of the Lions, you had to go out of your way to look up the various prerequisites for the jobs/classes in the game. But now the remaster clearly lays out all of that for you. You can see exactly how to get to exactly which jobs you want for the characters. And the nice thing is, especially for players who are new to Final Fantasy Tactics, the game doesn't outright tell you specifically what jobs you're leading the characters towards in the tree. Those jobs that you haven't unlocked yet are grayed out, but you can see the requirements for getting to them. And that's a nice way of building up suspense and anticipation for what those jobs are, which was one of my favorite aspects of playing through Final Fantasy Tactics for the first time back in the day, was not knowing all the potential jobs available for your party members and being surprised left and right by what you could unlock and experimenting and what have you. That was one of my favorite aspects of Tactics growing up. And then you have little things like not having to partake in every single random encounter you run into between, you know, the story segments on the world map when you're moving between point A and point B, which is really nice. And in a way that made the experience more challenging for me, in a way that I really liked, because when you play the original Tactics or War of the Lions, when you move between these locations and you run into random encounters in specific stages, you're obviously forced to battle the enemies you run into. And in doing so, you're able to level up the characters, you're able to unlock more jobs and weapons, what have you. So you're naturally progressing your characters and making them a little bit stronger for the story battles that are to come. But this time around, you can skip those. You're always given the option to skip the random encounters. And that's what I did for the most part. I kind of avoided grinding as much as possible for this experience because I wanted to feature the story as much as I could on stream. The only times I really went out of my way to grind were to unlock specific abilities I really wanted or jobs early on that I'm a huge fan of, such as, you know, the Dragoons, Ninjas, Monks. Those would be my top 3 favorite classes in Tactics. But for the most part, I avoided grinding, and it made for a much more challenging experience, especially since now you have difficulty settings in the game, and we played on the hardest mode, that being Tactician. And that's another thing I loved. The original Final Fantasy Tactics didn't have any difficulty setting. It was a standardized experience for all players. And so this really allowed me to engage with the game in a way that I never had before. And it was awesome. At a certain point in the original experience, you get really powerful and everything feels really trivial, especially when you unlock certain guest characters like the legendary Sidolphus Orlando. But in the Ivalice Chronicles, especially if you play on Tactician and avoid grinding as much as possible, the game really gives you a run for your money. And I really liked that because never before in the past had I really been challenged by Final Fantasy Tactics. But here in this experience, I was put through the ringer more than a couple of times, and I really had to think a little bit out of the box for a lot of the battles, especially towards the end, and especially for some of the more notorious fights, like the Weegriff battle, where Ramza, the main character, has to 1v1 him for a specific segment, which back in the day, by the way, you could pretty much soft lock yourself in that fight because it was part of one of the dungeon battles, which take place back to back to back. And if you save in the middle of one of those battles, which are sequential again, then if you're screwed at a certain point, you're not able to leave the dungeon and go to the world map and grind, which was a huge issue with Tactics back in the day, which I'd imagine caused a lot of broken hearts, a lot of hard resets, like 20 hours into the game for a lot of people. But that's another nice thing, by the way, that the remaster has patched up. You now have autosaves, and you now have the ability to exit sequential battles, go back to the world map, grind a little bit, come back, and then take them on. So lots of nice quality of life aspects, like I said, and having a difficulty setting now or various difficulty settings, as well as voice acting, is a really nice treat here. One of my favorite side quests and cameos of all time is in Final Fantasy Tactics, and that involves unlocking Cloud. That's right, Cloud is in Final Fantasy Tactics as a special guest character, or rather secret character, and even he's voice acted now. And the coolest thing is his voice is none other than Cody Christian of Final Fantasy VII Remake fame, and Cody Christian obviously is a phenomenal talent, and he makes Cloud sound exactly like he did in my head growing up. It's one of my favorite aspects of playing through the remake games. And yet again, he brings his A game here. And Cloud has way more dialogue than I remember. It's really cool to see that he has way more interactions and optional interactions at that, with a lot of the bosses you'll run into in the game. If you have him in your battle squad, he'll have some unexpected lines here and there on top of his main lines that he obviously has between himself and Ramza when you're unlocking him and whatnot. In general, it was just such a treat to hear him voiced in this game, and by Cody Christian as well. Just hearing everybody voiced, all the main characters, guest characters, it was such a joy. There were even some surprises here and there. I've been saying that a lot of them sounded like they did in my head growing up, and if not, they sounded even better. There are some characters who sounded absolutely nothing at all like what I expected. One of my favorite examples being the construct robot that you unlock. I always thought that they had this really low, resonant, gruff voice in my head, but it turns out that they've got this really high-pitched Penny Parker voice, which was really, really funny. So I had nothing but a grin on my face the whole way through, just listening to all the voices for all the characters. It was awesome. And since I was mentioning Cloud having more lines of dialogue than I remember, in general, that's the case across the board with this game. All the characters have way more dialogue than I remember in the original game, especially dialogue in boss fights. So halfway through a boss fight, you'll hear Ramza back and forthing with the boss that he's fighting. And a lot of these exchanges were not in the original game. And they're written really, really well. For the most part, they brought over the War of the Lions translation of the game, because in the original 1997 Final Fantasy Tactics, the localization and English translation was very rough, and the characters did not sound like they were a part of the setting of the game. They didn't sound like they were from the Middle Ages. They didn't have that fancy, posh Old English to them. But War of the Lions fixed that up and then some. It really refined and polished the script. And this game largely adapts the War of the Lions script and makes even more refinements to the writing. And the characters sound incredible, especially in these new exchanges between them that weren't there in either the original original Tactics, nor the War of the Lions version. So those are a real joy to witness, and they added so much more to the characters as well, their philosophies, their perspectives. It developed them a lot more. It was great. Overall, yeah, this is the greatest the story has ever been presented, and one of the greatest stories has ever been presented, which made me so happy. And I understood way more of it this time around. And the nice thing is that even if you don't have the voice acting to go off of to help you understand the story way better, what's really cool about Tactics, and this remaster specifically, is it adapts something that Final Fantasy XVI introduced a few years ago, which was this lore map, this timeline that you can take a look at on the world map of where every character is situated, what's going on, what the lore is behind every city in the kingdom of Ivalice, and what the political situation is. You can really sink your teeth way more into the lore, stop, pause, take it all in with this lore map, essentially. And I thought that was brilliant. It's such a great addition to a game that it's insanely appropriate for. So that was wonderful. But yeah, everything you know and love about the story is all here. It's all one-to-one. Nothing's been changed there. You have the wonderful story of Ramza and Delita, two friends who work to change the kingdom of Ivalice. There's Ramza, who's working behind the shadows to stop the corrupt church from resurrecting this ancient race of demons. Ramza's a good-natured soul. He wants to make the world a better place, but unfortunately, he's forgotten by history. He's branded a heretic, and Delita's the one who's remembered. Delita's whole agenda is trying to burn the aristocracy down, get revenge for the death of someone very close to him. He wants to manipulate everyone he can to accrue all this power and rule Ivalice. And that's the premise for one of the greatest stories ever told, and it makes me more than happy once again that it's been presented in the way that it has, and I really hope in the future that more remasters are done like this. In recent months, I've started to become less of a fan of the idea of remakes, full-on reconstructions from the ground up of video games that are classics, and I've become more of a fan of the idea of doing very high quality remasters, or remaster makes as I like to call them, where you've got the same core experience, nothing's been radically redone, but you have so many nice technical and aesthetic toppings to really brighten up the game and make it way more accessible to contemporary audiences, and just giving the game a glow up in general. I love that concept, and I love the way Square Enix executed that with Final Fantasy Tactics here, the Ivalice Chronicles. So overall, I would want to give this game a 10 out of 10 from where I'm sitting. But I'll be honest, there is a gripe that I had with it that I just couldn't shake that makes me ultimately give this a 9. And that is the fact that this game, besides its script, brings almost no content in from the War of the Lions version of Final Fantasy Tactics. That is the one thing that prevents this from being the perfect remaster. And it was disappointing because I feel like this was to be the ultimate definitive version of Final Fantasy Tactics. And for the most part, it absolutely is. But it's missing that 10%. And even though War of the Lions didn't add anything extraordinarily substantial to the original FF Tactics experience, what it did add was still phenomenal. You had stuff like the Dark Knight job that you could unlock, extra story battles where you actually got to control Delita and got more insight into his character, certain villains being given more development, like Wigra, for example. There's a whole cutscene that War of the Lions adds that really makes you sympathize more for this one villain in the experience, that of course, again, being Wigra. There are a lot of little things that pack a hell of a punch that War of the Lions brought to the table, including the beautiful cinematics, of which there aren't many, but of the ones there are, again, they pack a punch. This game has those, believe it or not. If you're like me, a War of the Lions fan, and you loved the cinematics in that game, and you missed those in here, there's a tab in the Ivalice Chronicles where you can read up on the lore of all the characters and what have you, and all the cutscenes, that allows you to actually view the War of the Lions cinematics, the beautiful, fully animated, pre-rendered cutscenes. I loved those in that game. And they're here again, and they feature new voices and everything. But it's just a shame that they're hidden away, and I wish that the game gave you the option to play them by default, because they're beautifully directed and are really exciting to see, because for the most part, you view everything through the perspective of the dioramas, the pixel characters. The story is like 95% of it is presented that way, but that extra 5%, seeing these fully animated cutscenes with these characters, was always such a joy and was always really fun to look forward to in War of the Lions. So it's a shame they aren't presented by default, but it's nice that they are there to access. But yeah, it would have been great to see the rest of the War of the Lions content in here as well. It's a shame it's not there. But there is some good news. It makes me really happy that Square Enix recently announced that Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles, sold more than 1 million copies. That was really surprising to me, and I'm really happy about this because this is a remaster to a, 1997 game, and one that isn't even a mainline entry in Square Enix's flagship Final Fantasy series. It's a spin-off. Yet it's sold over 1 million copies in 2 to 3 months, which is incredible for a game like this. And it bodes well for the future, I would say. Square Enix came out and said that themselves. I think they put out a recent announcement somewhere along the lines of they're interested in adding post-launch content to the game. Now, whether that'll be the War of the Lions content, something entirely new that we've never seen before, I don't know. But just any content, any additional content we can get our hands on for this experience would be delightful, and I'm really excited to see what Square Enix meant by that exactly. So some stuff to look forward to in the future with this one. All in all, guys, Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles was a phenomenal experience. I'm glad I finally returned to it after a bit of a break and finished it just the other night over on Twitch. So yeah, if you're a fan of the Final Fantasy franchise and you haven't played Tactics, you owe it to yourself to change that. And if you're like me and are not huge on tactical role-playing games or just strategy games in general, I mean, hell, I didn't mention this earlier, but dude, I don't even play chess. I've never been able to wrap my head around it, remember the moves. I urge you to at least give Tactics a shot and see if this game is the one game that serves as an exception to that for you, because that was the case with me growing up. And hell, like I said, the greatest commendation I can give Final Fantasy Tactics is that it is my second favorite Final Fantasy, even though it's a part of a genre that I normally never play games from. There's just so much I love about this game. I didn't even touch on the music. It's nothing new for the remaster. They didn't add any new tracks or anything like that, but they didn't have to. I'm glad they didn't rearrange the score, because the soundtrack of the original Final Fantasy Tactics is so legendary. It's one of the best OSTs of all time, and it was such a joy getting to broadcast this game for you guys, feature it on stream finally, getting to just experience and sink my teeth into one of my favorite games ever, getting to listen to that music, all of that, because for years this game was stuck in PS1, PSP, and iOS jail, so iOS/mobile. So I'm really glad that Tactics now exists on pretty much every platform. It's accessible to everybody, and that it's in the best state it's ever been in. Almost the best state. It's just that 5% that's missing. That is the War of the Lions content. But again, I really hope that Square Enix considers adding that in, and that it's not paid. That's the other thing that I kind of mentioned a couple times throughout my playthrough, is that if they do add the War of the Lions content, I really hope it's not paid DLC. It's something I can unfortunately see them doing, and that would be a real shame. So I really hope that it's part of a free update, because the War of the Lions content, again, it's not a lot of stuff, so it doesn't warrant paying money for it, but it does pack a punch. It does add a ton to the experience. So I'm hoping we get it as part of a free update or something. But all in all, Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles, is a hell of a good time, and I absolutely approve of it, and I absolutely recommend that you all go out and give this game a spin. And until the next review, stay happy, stay healthy, stay positive, and as always, keep on keeping on.